Good evening and welcome, Quintessence Virtual Choral Festival registrants. We are so happy that you are with us for this discussion that we have been looking forward to for so long. Before I introduce our guests, I want to mention just a bit of housekeeping. Also on this panel, although you can't see him, is my colleague Adam Reinwald, who is one of the fantastic people who is making this festival happen all week. You'll notice in your Zoom webinar settings that there is a function for Q&A, and I'm certain there will be a lot of questions for our guests. We would invite you during the course of the discussion to type those questions into that box. Adam will be monitoring those and kind of compiling and condensing them. And then at the end of our time, we'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers. So as the discussion is going on, as you think of questions, don't wait, go ahead and type them in. I also want to mention that we regret that Pam Elrod Huffman is not with us. She had to bow out, unfortunately, because of a family emergency. And so we're sorry that she's not here. But I want to take a brief moment, because I don't want to take away from any of what they have to say, to introduce our guests. First of all, Kiki Wilson, who is a passionate enthusiast of classical music and initiated the Robert Shaw documentary film that I hope you have all had a chance to view over the last day or so. It'll be available for you to view through tomorrow night. She's also the executive producer on that film. She was a 37-year veteran of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra Chorus. She sang with Robert Shaw for 18 of those years. She conducted several rehearsals for Shaw. She was a German coach for the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra Chorus, and she's joining us tonight from Atlanta. And I have to say that it is because of Kiki Wilson and her colleague, Michael Martin, that we were able to show you this film. And Kiki, we are so grateful for that. So thank you, and thank you for being here. Dr. Ann Howard Jones is Professor of Emerita of Music at Boston University, where she was Director of Choral Activities for 22 years, retiring in 2015. She built an amazing choral program at Boston University and trained in the graduate program a whole generation of choral conductors, of which I am very proud to be one. From 1984 to 1998, Anne was the assistant conductor for Robert Shaw and the Atlanta Symphony Choruses, where she was assistant conductor for the choruses, sang in the alto section, and assisted with the Robert Shaw Chamber Singers. And Anne is joining us from Boston. And then Alice Parker is an internationally renowned American composer, arranger, conductor, and pedagogue. She has authored 5 operas, 11 song cycles, 33 cantatas, 11 works for chorus and orchestra, 47 choral suites, more than 40 hymns, as well as dozens of beloved arrangements of folk songs, spirituals, and hymns, many done in her 20-year collaboration with Robert Shaw. In recent decades, she has been leading singing and teaching song leading and composition through her organization Melodious Accord, and she is joining us from the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts. What an amazing panel we have tonight. We are so happy that you're all with us. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we have, as I think I've mentioned to you before, about 150 people registered for this festival. And I know that many of them have already viewed the film. Kiki, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the film specifically at the beginning, because I saw it when it first came out, and then I rewatched it in preparation for this talk. And it is such a wonderful film, and we're just so grateful for it. It's an amazing record and collection of people. Can you talk about how this came to be and why you felt so passionately about making it happen? And are you a filmmaker by background? How did that come to be?
No, I'm not a filmmaker, but I guess I've made a film, so maybe that qualifies me, I don't know. This was a story that just needed to be told, and it really, in my mind, was essential because of generations who might not know of Robert Shaw, or knowing of him, not realizing or having even a scratch of who he was. So it was after that remarkable concert in East Berlin. Anne was there and spoke eloquently of it in the film, as she spoke eloquently of everything in the film, as did Alice. Wonderful participant. I mean, who could go wrong with this cast, right? We came back from that tour in 1988, and I started talking to people about there needs to be a documentary. And, I had my own career in a whole nother field, and was married to somebody who had a very busy life. And so it just, though the seeds were planted, it didn't get any further. So I came to a point in my life where it was time to look to do something. And this just, of course, it was 2008. Go back and do your history. I went to talk to people about this film. They said, "Oh, great idea, but nobody has any money now." It's, in the height of the recession.
Mm.
So good timing, right? But when you talk to people about a project like this, everybody said, "Oh, yes, we must do it, and we must do it quickly," because Shaw's contemporaries, Alice is a bit younger, and so we needed to sort of move if we were going to move. And everybody just thought it was a wonderful idea, and you get such great thinking because you have wonderful people who were passionate about him, and brought the story together. And an amazing film team that I had. Nobody knew each other in the beginning of this, and there were like 5 of us pushing this rock up the hill, and they all believed in the story, and I think it shows through the film.
There's amazing both stock footage and still photographs, and it's extraordinary the way it's weaved together. I was struck in watching it again this weekend, particularly in the sections of the film talking about the collegiate chorale, looking at that choir and how diverse it was. I mean, it was so lovely and so amazing to see. And I know that that was important to Shaw, that it be so. And I also know that if you put a chorus together in New York City, perhaps it's easier to draw a diverse chorus together. But I mean, it really was striking and amazing to see.
Well, I don't think that was his goal necessarily. He just went after the best voices. And Anne and Alice can speak to this much better. He would have taken somebody whose skin was purple if they walked in the door and could sing in the way that he was looking for. So it did become, and when you think about when that was,
Mm-hmm.
like the late 30s, early 40s, my understanding is that even in the early Fred Waring days, he had latched on to a Black male singer, and Waring was not so sure. And certainly as he moved through with the Robert Shaw Chorale tours in the South and elsewhere, they sometimes slept in the bus and ate in the bus because they would not be served as an integrated chorus. So lots of good stories, and he stuck with his guns.
Yes. Alice, I know that you first encountered Shaw. Correct me if I'm wrong, I know you will, but you had gotten a degree in composition at Smith College and then went to New York to study at Juilliard and met and encountered Shaw. I'm curious to know, people love to hear you talk about your collaboration with Shaw. As a way into that, I'm curious to know who you were as a composer before you met him, and who you think you were as a composer after and during your collaboration.
I met him because I had given up on composition. As I graduated from Smith College with a degree in composition and thought of going on for more schooling in composition, I realized that I would be making myself miserable, because late 40s was a terrible time for composing. Everybody was out to, melody was dead, harmony was dead, it had to be new, it had to be exciting, it had to be challenging. And that was not me at all. And so I had just literally decided not to go on in composition. What was I going to do? I thought, choral conducting. I've always had choruses. I had my own group at Smith. And that was such a natural place. And Shaw was just making a name for himself. So I met him at Tanglewood that summer of 1947. And I applied at Juilliard and was too late for the early entrance exam stuff. So I had to go to New York in September in the heat and take the entrance exams for Juilliard. And I always thought that I was accepted for his class as the token female. And there I was with 6 men, all of whom were at least 10 years older than I was. All of whom had choruses around New York. All of whom had all these other experiences. And I was green as I could be. And boy did I learn. Yeah, it was wonderful. So I wasn't a composer at all. The experience at Smith, I had a lovely teacher, older German man, but it stopped me from composing for 20 years. Those 20 years I spent with Shaw, I hardly wrote a thing because I was so tangled up in my mind about responsibility towards the music of the future, and it had to be, I couldn't use a key signature, and I couldn't write in major or minor. It was just ridiculous. So what Shaw did was take me down from that exalted view of composition that's way up here, not connected to common people, and down into the hymns and the spirituals and the folk songs, not from my choice, but this is what he needed, and I was there to do. And it was very easy for me to write an arrangement, a sketch. It was very easy for him to point out that 95% of it was ridiculous and that I should focus much more on melody and what was there. I just learned enormously from him. I learned the compositional things that I wasn't taught at college from Shaw. I'm just thinking, should I say that I learned more about composing than about conducting from him? But that may not be true. I would have to think about that.
As I recall, the impetus for starting to write arrangements together was pretty practical. That if the record companies wanted records that they could sell, if they were going to allow Shaw to do the B minor Mass and the Mozart Requiem, do I remember that right?
Exactly. You do, exactly. And they picked out exactly the pieces that they wanted first, all those love song albums and the Easter carols. I didn't know there was such a thing as an Easter carol when I went to the New York Public Library and started looking up. But I found all the riches there. It trained me in all kinds of disciplines that I hadn't had any exposure to before.
And so would you talk a little bit about how it worked, how you would bring things in for Shaw, and you would talk about what you might make a stab at arranging and that whole process over those 20 years?
People always love to hear this story about the first album, because we were working totally, we had no idea how it would work together. But Victor wanted Easter carols, so go find some Easter carols. So I go down to the library, I get 5x8 index cards printed with music staves on one side, so I can go down. This is pre-Xerox days, this is dark ages. And I can copy down the melody in the first verse and where to find it, if I don't want to go back. And I found a whole lot of material, and I didn't copy everything I found, but I used a certain amount of judgment. I took about, as I remember it, 60 or 70 cards to Shaw. And I've told this story so often that it may be more apocryphal than real now, but the basic of it is right. That he sat there with these cards as if he were dealing a deck of cards, and on his left would have been, this has to be in. In front of him would have been, this could be in. On his right was no way. He picked up my cards, glanced at the first one, and chucked it aside. No way, no way, no way. And I said, well, wait a minute. I love that one. He said, what do you like about it? And I said, it's a gorgeous melody. And he said, did you read the text? Well, it was about Easter. That was all I'd looked for. And I looked at the text, and of course, it was perfectly terrible poetry. So I thought, oh, I better be much more careful. And then the other story that I loved here was that I found another one that he objected to. And I said, but I really love that one. He said, what do you like? And I said, well, the second verse is just lovely. And he said, too late. It had to be exactly right. So he taught me to go through melody after melody, thousands of melodies, and be very, very exacting about what I did back to him, which was the beginning of discernment, And so it was neat. He would do one or maybe two albums a year, mostly one, and we would know a year in advance what the album was going to be and when he was going to record, and I would have all of that year from June till the next June to do the basic research. And so that first year, I took all the cards that he had let go by and did arrangements of those pieces, sketches, and took them all to him and started going through them together at the piano. And there were some of them that he really loved and did relatively little too, but many of them, I would play it through and this pencil would come over my shoulder and put a little X on the music. And I wasn't able to talk about it. And he's saying, justify it. He's saying, but what it was that he felt a little, what I call a badump with my students. Something interrupted his hearing. It was not absolutely clear. And he would know where it was because he would put the little X at that point, but he might not know how to fix it or whether it needed it. And maybe it was just one note that we could shift or a little bit of something to move one way or another. Or it might mean that you have to go back and redo the whole arrangement because as you unraveled it, it kept unraveling more. So he taught me to be enormously critical about what I was writing myself. And they never managed to do that in college. It was hard for me to criticize. Yeah.
All this time during this collaboration, also you were a traveling member of the Robert Shaw Chorale as well, right? And
never.
Oh, never. You never were. But your husband was. My husband was, Tom was, but I stayed home. No, that's another story that could bear repeating if I'm not taking too much time. No. I was a conducting student of his at Juilliard, and part of our responsibility was to be in the collegiate chorale and attending all those rehearsals and concerts. And then we always went out after rehearsals for lengthy recaps of the rehearsals. That was wonderful learning time. But so I had to go take an audition to get into the collegiate chorale. And I think I was one of the maybe 2 or 3 people in history that did the whole sight reading exam without any difficulty the first time through. But I did not pass the vocal exam because I had never had any vocal training. And I had a somewhat breathy, plain voice, good range, but no volume. And so he said they had a committee that was doing the auditions, and he had to take their word for it. So I went back with him with my tail between my legs and saying I didn't pass the audition. So he sat there trying to think, well, he didn't ever audition people for the collegiate chorale, but he did for the small chorus inside it. So he said, we'll put you down for an audition for the small chorus. So I had to go in and sing. I sang, God help me, the Beethoven Ich liebe dich. And Billy Johnson was sitting at the piano and Shaw was there and a couple of other people. It might have been Clayton, I can't remember. But anyway, they were sitting there and they sank lower and lower in their chairs to keep from laughing out loud as I, with this little quavery voice, sang all the way through the end. And at the end, Bob didn't even lift up his face. He said, fantastic intonation, which is the only possible thing he could find. So I got into the collegiate chorale, the amateur chorale. I got in on the basis that I always sit in the back corner and never let him hear me. So when we played through the arrangements, I could not sing a line that I couldn't play on the piano. Or if I did, I remember hearing once, for God's sake, don't crescendo. But we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun of teasing and stuff. And I just learned my ambition from the first time I started working with him. I want to be able to hear like that. I want to hear what he is hearing when he makes those comments, when he goes back to this place and when he makes this comment. And I came a long way, but certainly never all the way. He would make adjustments in balance, never asking anybody to sing louder, but bottom 3 altos sing tenor line from measure 17 to measure 23. Then now sing it again and let me hear it. And then he would say, okay. And I would not be able to hear any difference from what had been before. So he had just incredible ears. But also what he had was this sense of what music is, what melody is, what the vital connection between our ears and our minds and our hearts all adds up to, so that it wasn't dry and academic the way it could be in school. And it wasn't just getting everything exactly right in the score because you had to do it exactly the way it was in the score. It wasn't any of those things. It was a very deeply humanistic approach. And that love for text, for poetry, and for all kind of texts. I did a lot of the translations work along with him. And this hunting for just exactly the right phrase that would go with the music. If Haydn had written it to the German text,
And then they'd use the English text that didn't go with it at all, except in the meaning, and trying to find the English phrase that exactly paralleled the German. And that kind of thing was just fascinating. And we could do that by the hour. Yeah.
There's something I've always wanted to hear you talk about, Alice, and it has to do with your husband, Tom Pyle, who was Shaw's great friend and singer in the chorale forever. And I just remember reading about this in one of the biographies that your husband died very suddenly in 1976. Is that right? And you
Yes.
were raising children. And Shaw
Yeah.
writes so beautifully about the fact that he recruited all of the alums from the Robert Shaw Chorale coming in from all over the country, put together an orchestra, and put together a performance of the Brahms Requiem at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And I went back and read the letter that he wrote about it today, and he said this was without a doubt the finest chorus ever assembled in the history of Western music for your husband's funeral.
It was a chorus of 500. It took the whole, from the crossing of the cathedral up. And the orchestra was all volunteer, but they were New York's best people. They'd all known Tom because Tom had worked with him for so long and with other conductors, and was one of the few people that was allowed onto the stage at Carnegie Hall to adjust chairs and do things like that for Shaw. So everybody knew him. But when Tom died, Shaw called me way in the early morning afterwards and said, what can we do? And I said, I cannot possibly ask anybody to pick out a small choir. Everybody wants to sing. They've all got to sing. So it needs to be a piece that everybody can sing. So we decided very quickly on the Brahms Requiem. And then everybody just pulled in. There were just, people did fly in. It was just amazing. And it was during an evensong service. And I had one of my thoughts about orchestral musicians totally destroyed. During the service, many of the orchestra did the responses to the Episcopal service. They were not sitting there as apart. They were very much part of the whole thing. And after the whole service, of course, everybody wanted to come up and see me, so the lines were endless. And I didn't even realize this and didn't know what was going on until later. The cathedral people cleared out the crossing and put trestle tables across it, and everybody had brought food. If this is in the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, with the cathedral packed, so imagine the amount of food and the number of people. And we were there for 4 or 5 hours afterwards, and everybody just visiting and having a wonderful time with that. And that performance was just uplifting in a way that music hardly ever is,
That's amazing. It's amazing to think about.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And I'd be curious to know a couple of things off the top. Number one, how you came to know Shaw and to work with him, and kind of a corollary for that, as I kind of asked Alice, is I'd love to hear you talk about what you learned in school versus what you learned from Shaw.
Well, it happened that, as one dean put it once, I was following a man around at a certain point in my life, and my husband was at the University of Georgia in a job, and I was teaching there also. And in the process of those years, Mr. Shaw was invited, as were others, to combine the choirs and lead a big festival chorus appearance. And because I was unfettered at home, no children, I offered to pick him up at the hotel and deposit him at the proper hour and all of that stuff. And it was really that got us at least to know one another a little bit. And I was not singing in the symphony chorus. I had my own. How do you like that? On Monday nights, what was I doing? My own community chorus, the nerve. And it wasn't until I went off to graduate school and came back to Georgia to resume my teaching that I decided, this is silly. I've idolized this man and his work forever, and I'm not going to do my own community chorus. What can I say? I need to learn from him. So I screwed up my courage and went to audition, and I sang Schumann from Frauenliebe und Leben, and he wasn't there. night. I don't know exactly why, but he got a call clearly because he called me in my office at this little college the next morning. Now imagine someone who is your hero, all of a sudden on the other end of the phone, hello, Anne, this is Robert, in that unmistakable voice. And I didn't have to say Robert who. So I nearly fell on the floor. Well, I understand you're quite a singer. And I said, well, I hope it was okay. And he said, oh, it was better than okay. And once in a while, we need help doing section rehearsals. Now, today, I wanted to say, oh, well, I don't know. I'll have to think that over. But then, of course, I said, oh, anything I can do to help, I'm happy to do. So I went to the first rehearsal, and I believe the piece was the Berlioz Requiem of all things. And I just was alto number 381. Well, I was always way at the top of the alto section. And people don't know what that numbering system was. That'd be interesting to talk about, but it's very minor compared to all the other things we want to talk about today. Anyway, so I helped out, and soon the guy who'd been the assistant went away, and I just gradually assumed more and more responsibility, all the while singing. And I sang in both the big chorus and the chamber chorus, and helped him get the Robert Shaw Institute going. It was actually a very wonderful collaboration. There was Wendell Whalum from Morehouse College, African American, John Haberlin from Georgia State, and we called him Sam Young from Emory, from the Candler School of Theology. The four of us took ourselves to Mr. Shaw's office and approached him about doing a little teaching. Well, the only format we could think of then was to incorporate it into the work he was already doing, so he didn't have to do more, that we would just bring a coalition of people from wherever they would come, and they would attend the rehearsals, and then maybe at one point he would speak to us, but maybe not even that. Well, the administrative overload of that was just more than the symphony staff could manage, and so they decided that was not possible. So long story short, well, maybe we'll try to go where you are in the summer. Where would that be? Well, Mrs. Shaw wants to be in France. Well, we could go there. You can just imagine. But we decided that we couldn't go unless everyone were to be paid, that no one could have any expenses. Well, again, it was very much negotiation and a lot of discussion, and he was all over the country doing work with colleges and universities at that time and listening to these fantastic voices. And so it was just a snap of the finger, and a chorus of 60 was organized, and we went to France for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, I guess, rehearsing and performing all over the region where he and Mrs. Shaw had and still have a home. Imagine my shock. One recent year, within the last 5 years, I went looking for that house, and I thought I knew exactly where it was, in this little crossroads of a town in France. Went down a little side alleyway here, and it's out in the country. All of a sudden, you see on the mailbox, Thomas Shaw. There again, I nearly fell out of the car, because it just was so powerful to remind myself of all of that. So anyway, it started very innocuously almost, and grew and grew and grew. When I went to Boston University, I was at the University of Illinois first, and he came there a time or two to conduct. And one of the students said, after watching him rehearse and perform a St. John Passion, it just can't be that easy. And I thought, isn't that an interesting lesson? Because his movements were minimum. I mean, there was a lot of activity in his body, but not much theatricality, and certainly not much active gyration. But inside his ear and his head was this steel trap, just like you're saying, Alice, and things that one might hear, but he could pinpoint so quickly, and then put the right word to it to describe to the musician exactly what to do to make it more what Mr. Shaw thought Mr. Bach might have had in mind. I mean, just astounding. He came to BU then after I was here, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. Haydn Creation, King David of Honegger, Brahms Requiem, of course, on down the line. And the students their lives were changed. There's no doubt about it. He'd just walk into the room and their lives would change. And we would say the same thing, wouldn't we, Kiki? We'd sit in that rehearsal hall waiting for him, and he'd start down those steps, and the room would just change over. into, instead of a ragtag bunch of, well, musicians, we all of a sudden became a chorus, hanging on his every word. He'd wheel that piano around and do those warm-up exercises and then get us all to do and then start the rehearsal. And every rehearsal started the same way. So I learned from him all that you said about balancing, Alice. Not you sing louder, you sing less, but let's move 4 voices here and 3 voices there. And he was meticulous and fastidious about that till the end. His scores, my score, top of the alto section. So I was frequently singing second soprano here and there if the soprano part ventured too low, and then often singing regular alto. My score is full of arrows. So you had to be a smart singer to be on the seam of any section, I used to say. So look out between the tenors and the basses. And so we always had plenty, and never discussed it with anybody. And I want to just tell one funny story. At one point in a rehearsal period just before Christmas, I was to rehearse the big chorus in the basement where the rehearsal room was, and he was going to rehearse the chamber chorus on the stage prior to a Christmas festival. So when I was done with the downstairs, I was to come back upstairs, and it's double choir Bach. So I took my place where I was supposed to be, and he'd stopped everything, and he said, "Now go over there," to me. And I said, "Okay." So I went over there where he pointed. 3 more seconds. No, now go back. And finally, after about 4 of those things, I said, Mr. Shaw, if I'm causing trouble because I haven't been here for all the rehearsal, I'll just sit. No, he said, it makes that much difference. And I thought, it's what you said, Alice. He somehow could hear those minute adjustments in the sound. Now, one other horrible thing, we sat in circles most of the time when we rehearsed, a big circle.
Right.
And one time I was always, of course, in the alto section, and he came by and wiggled his baton at me and said, "We don't need quite that much vibrato, dear." Went right on. I thought, well, but of course I was singing carelessly, on my mind more on what was he going to say next than what I was doing. And I think that's another thing he encouraged us all to be very conscious of our own responsibility to the art. And if he had to say, "Well, do you have a crescendo there?" to the section, and we'd say, "Well, yes." And he said, "Well, you didn't make it." But then he'd go right back to conducting just the same way as he had been conducting before. "I'm not going to show you that. It's in the music. You do it." And the same thing with entrances and cutoffs. "Well, doesn't the music tell you to stop there?" "Well, yes." "Well, I'm not going to. Any fool can stand up here and point when you're supposed to sing, or off when you're supposed to stop." And so I've said that to hundreds of workshops. I'm out of the cueing in the conducting business, and always someone comes up to me and says, "Well, if you don't cue and if you don't cut off, what in the world do you do?" Which I love, because Mr. Shaw would have loved that too, because for most people, conducting is not artistic at all. And of course, for me, that's all it is.
Right.
So I don't know where I don't think I answered the question, except
No, you did
way
great.
long time ago. But who learns conducting? Who learns that at the university?
Yeah.
I did learn to sing. I was a voice major, and I think that in addition to his wishing for even rudimentary piano skills, which he never had, he also, I think, knew that he shouldn't try to make sounds so that people would imitate. And I think that's dangerous anyway. I don't think most choral singers should imitate the voices of the conductor. I think, however, he had the capacity, unlike most of us, to put into words the precise kind of sound, color of sound, quality of sound, contribution to the text that he thought should happen. Then he left it to us. And I think that was one of the exciting things about singing for him. You had a little bit of your own responsibility. So I can't say, I mean, I was with him for 15 years, and while terrifying, at the same time, it was also inspiring beyond words.
I want to remind our folks that are watching, if you have questions, to type them in the Q&A, and we'll get to them at the end. You mentioned the warm-ups and the rehearsal techniques, which is something I'm really interested in, both as having been a student of yours and heard about them. And I think a lot of choral conductors especially look on some of those techniques and warm-ups as being a kind of a rigid codified system. And I was reminded by watching the film, of course, that Shaw never had a conservatory education. He certainly never had any formal training in choral conducting or vocal production. And so those techniques and those warm-ups on which he relied, and I mean, who here mostly begins a rehearsal on an oo vowel and an e? I'm one. Came through him through experimentation and trying to figure out a shortcut to get what he wanted from the ensemble. I mean, is that your perception of those?
It's absolutely. He would go home after a rehearsal, I hear tell. I did never go with him, but he would go home and think, well, now that's not working. Now, why is that not working? What can I do to figure out how to make that work better? But we never began a rehearsal without, I have about 7 principles. And I won't rattle them off, but they're around. Establishing a good unison. We started with unison octave on an oo vowel all the time, quietly, I might add, and then progressed through a series of vowels. I usually added a few more vowels than he would, because I think the ah vowel gets us in terrible trouble, and he avoided it. So rather than avoid it totally, I'd try to sneak up on it a little bit. And always this, we did an exercise to extend the range that was expanded intervals. And people used to make fun of that exercise, I think, because it sounded kind of strange and they didn't know what it was about. But it always helped people navigate through the treacheries of a passaggio or of a passage and they didn't even know that's what was happening to them. And then lots of crescendi and decrescendi over a certain number of beats. Rarely did we rehearse in those warm-up exercises anything to do with rhythm. Rhythm came when we got into the music and started counting. And I don't know when he started count singing. Alice, you might be able to verify that. Somebody said he learned that from Brock McElheron.
Well,
No?
he could have, but it was way after my time. I think it was when he was really working full time with the orchestra and he needed the chorus to be on the beat, and most choruses are not on the beat.
You know, my favorite story about that is he used to say choruses are the most mucilaginous instrument. Of course, people look at what in the world? They don't remember that there used to be a glue on our desks.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's the name, mucilage.
That's right. So he said we have to unstick the chorus. I never sang in a chorus where we separated more. And my voice teacher colleagues bemoan that. They think that singing is all about line. Well, sure it is, but you have to be responsible to the rhythm as well. And when you're trying to sing with an orchestra who goes ta and the tone is now, you can't have the singer milking the attack. So lots of that kind of discussion, but very little. Now we're going to do this exercise where you're going to be responsible for the rhythm. But the counting was incessant. We sang that Berlioz Requiem until I never heard a note of text, a word of text, until the week of the performance. Was telling yesterday. The Querdens May movement in that work is a cappella, and it's got all those nasty letters E in Latin, which we always quibble about. How closed is the A? How open is the A? And most of us have decided now that we've got a little compromise available. It's E2. It's not A and it's not E. It's halfway in between. Well, querens me se disti lastus. I mean, there are thousands of them. And never to practice on those vowels, which many people don't have in their voices at all. The intonation and everything else just went right down the drain. Okay, back, sing it again. And it didn't actually solve the problem because it wasn't a question of precision, it was a question of getting the vowel right. And that, I think he hoped I would be able to help with some of that.
I know from studying with you as well, Alice, that you are all about text. For you, a piece of vocal music begins with text always. And so that seems like a contradiction. You say that in your years of working with Shaw, he wasn't so much about all of that rhythm and
there wasn't any counting. He was always very rhythmic, and it was very clear that I had a very weak rhythmic sense, and it was his job to pull me up to scratch. But it is. I just was thinking back on it. We worked closely together for 20 years, which ended when he went to Atlanta to work with orchestras. And he went more and more connected to the page and to the notation and to people who were singing from the notation and needed to have it interpreted for them or needed to come to a common interpretation of it. I went the other way. I went trying to go to improvisation and getting people to sing without music. And that meant that I was totally working by ear instead of eye. And I found that if I rehearsed the words first in rhythm, then we were exactly coping with things like Anne was talking about. Where does this, where do you start this word? It has to come on this beat beforehand, and this one has to come afterwards. And what is the vowel sound here? Can we all make the same vowel sound? Just speaking, because if you get the rhythm and the words to any piece, then it's really relatively easy to do the pitches because you've got the place to drop them. They drop right where they belong. Learning both at once, rhythm and pitch, is terribly hard because neither one is precise because you're trying to get too many, you're working in two worlds at once.
Mm.
Yeah, but I learned it basically from him.
He would always say, take everything down to the smallest unit. So if you're going to do rhythm, you might not even do pitch, might just counting your way through something, but that always seemed to most people to be a step that was really unnecessary. So we would immediately put pitch in, but never text until the very end. And it almost always got us in trouble. Oh, I keep losing you. Do you lose me too?
No, you're fine.
No.
You see me, but I can't see you.
Yes,
So
yes. We
I
can
guess
see you
I'll
just fine.
Okay, I'll leave it alone.
Going back to the film for a moment, the film is nicely bookended by two very powerful performances. One with the Robert Shaw Chorale going to Moscow during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Atlanta Symphony Chorus going to East Berlin. And both of those performances are talked about. It's extraordinary what the circumstances of both and how powerful they were. And so, Kiki, Anne, I would love to hear you talk about the latter, and I assume, Alice, that your husband went to Moscow for the former. I would love to hear about those trips.
He didn't. The day that the Cuban Missile whatever it was got resolved was the day I produced our fifth child. And there was no way we could find anybody to come and look at 4 small children while I was in the hospital producing another one. I always felt so guilty about that. He did not get to go to Russia. So you'll have to ask the others about that.
Okay.
I'll start, Kiki, and you can throw in. I remember distinctly, first of all, the absolute opulence of the Schauspielhaus, which is where the performance was, as contrasted with the brown nothingness of the construction sites all around and great big earth moving equipment moving nothing. So that was the first thing. And then we get in there, and then of course the chorus is all assigned a spot, and the chorus wrapped around the front so that the end soprano was right beside an audience member, almost literally. And all the way around the front, and the orchestra was below on the stage. So as soon as we started the warm-up, it was clear we were in a very special acoustic. And here we are in this place singing about Freude and Brüder and all of these elevated concepts in this terrible time. We'd been through Checkpoint Charlie with the mirrors under the buses, and some of the members of the orchestra and chorus stayed home because they were afraid they wouldn't get back. They'd confiscate their travel documents, and that would be the end of that. So we were going through all of this. We get there, we start singing, and of course we're overcome, chorus. We're singing Brüder and Freude. Shaw stopped. Do you remember this, Kiki? And he said, no, not there. Don't give everything you've got there. Wait, and I'll give you a signal. And when I give you a signal, then push the back wall of this place out. And so I think we were all just hanging on every instant, waiting for him to say, no. And sure enough, here it came, and we made a sound I don't think any of us has ever felt, heard, or made since. Incredible. So pretty soon, all the audience members up there by the sopranos are crying. And I thought, for crying out loud, sopranos, don't cry. You won't be able to sing. Yeah. And it was all over, endless encores. Finally, Mr. Shaw grabs Bill Prussel by the hand and leads him off stage to signal that the orchestra should follow. And still, the audience wouldn't stop. I think the chorus was gone too. And it was the only time I ever saw Robert Shaw come back on the stage alone to take a bow.
Multiple times.
Multiple times. And he just
They
couldn't
wouldn't
get
let
it.
him go.
He said the State Department didn't want him to do it, B minor mass in East Berlin yet. No, Beethoven 9, what am I saying? But they wanted something less, I don't know, confrontational, I suppose, in its politics. And he said, well, then get somebody else. I'm not doing it. So finally, proof was in the pudding. People wanted desperately to hear it. I thought it was
The
changed my
story
life.
of the Soviet Union and the Moscow, well, I mean, it wasn't just that concert, but the fact that people stood, and
Oh,
you tell that story wonderfully in the film, Anne, you should tell it.
what did I tell?
That
Oh,
they
after
were,
the performance, yes. First of all, Shaw was squabbling with the State Department because the State Department wanted the Shaw Chorale to go representing the U.S. abroad. Okay, Shaw said, I'll go to Russia, to the USSR, if we can do the B minor mass in Moscow. You lost your mind, man. You can't do the B minor mass in Moscow, for crying out loud. Well, then you got to get somebody else. So I don't know how long this went on, but apparently some weeks or months. Finally, okay, we'll do it. So we get there, they get there. I wasn't singing in this. And the audience was packed, number one, and mesmerized. By the end of the piece, they had no response at all. It was total silence. And Shaw said they weren't quite sure whether this was awe or terror or overcomeness or what. And then finally, of course, the lid came off and they just screamed. So the power of powerful, wonderful music penetrates even those very difficult regions. And I didn't participate in that one, but we certainly did plenty of others. It was a remarkable time.
We're going to move on in just a second to some questions that panelists have, but I was able to be on kind of a pre-talk with these amazing women yesterday, and they were just bubbling over with stories and anecdotes. So can I just throw it open to you three? Are there any particular stories that you would love to tell that you haven't covered?
Well, I think I'd like to have Kiki tell about the footage from Moscow in the film, because that's something nobody knows.
the interesting thing about putting together a film like this, and if any of you think that you want to take on such a project, my number is readily available. You can call me and I'll talk you out of it, because you give from both wrists and profusely. But there were two or three stories that I was really adamant about telling. And if you don't have footage, you can't tell the story. Not in a film. You can do it in a book, right? But you cannot, the two wonderful directors I had, one at each elbow, said, no, you can't tell the Poulenc story if you don't have anything to show while you're telling the story. So this Moscow story was so powerful, particularly as it had this side-by-side thread of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is just so dramatic on top of just the music as Anne has described it, and Alice knows so well from many performances. We wanted to tell the story, and we thought it'd be a great way to start the film, but we didn't have footage. So we just wrote to the theater in Moscow, and they came forth with this unbelievable envelope full of gorgeous black and white photographs, most of which get shown in the film. And then another friend who was very helpful in making this film had a recording, an actual recording from that tour. I don't know whether it was from that actual performance. They performed the B minor mass multiple times. And it turned out that, as wonderful it was to have that, and we have that in our archives, it was too scratchy to use in the film. So we dubbed in another performance. But to have that, I mean, when that envelope came, and it was, 3/4 of an inch thick, full of these gorgeous, gorgeous, I don't know. a collection of that most people would die over, you know. It's
Yes,
just
it's
fantastic.
fantastic.
And a black female soprano, and you know, several black singers in the chorus. It's all very evident there. You can't recreate those chandeliers anyplace else. So.
No, they did do opulence well, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
I think there are so many remarkable ways in which he insisted. I mean, here we're just now celebrating, if you can put it that way, the life and death of John Lewis. Robert Shaw was, in his own way, a breaker of barriers. I think, you would know this better than I by now, Kiki, but I think one of the reasons he was compelled to go to Atlanta was because of Ralph McGill, who was then the editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and those musicians at Morehouse and Spelman, who were on top of these fabulous college and university students who were making fabulous music. So he right away, Shaw, got all of those groups involved in the Christmas festival. I didn't ever have a conversation with him about this, so you'd have to say if you did. I don't think he ever felt that he truly accomplished what he had hoped. The African-American audience particularly was not very amenable to coming to Symphony Hall. So what does Mr. Shaw do? Take all of us there. So we gave, I don't know how many concerts at Morehouse and at Spelman. And why not? You know, why not? But those efforts on his part were in him from the beginning, and churning and churning and churning. So I also, just one more quick thing about the auditions that you described in New York and resulting in such a diverse group. Back from the war came all of these musicians. He told me once they auditioned 600 singers for the Robert Shaw Chorale. What were there, Alice, 40 of them or so?
Yeah,
And,
32
yeah,
probably.
okay, and
32.
of those, not all could read music. But these gorgeous voices with these unbelievable abilities in sheer vocalism. So he always said, if I can have somebody playing the parts without error, they will learn it in about the first time through because their ears are so excellent.
Yeah,
and
right.
all the way through, every rehearsal I ever did with him, there was always a pianist.
Yes.
We never rehearsed a cappella.
Yeah.
So I think partly it was from that he wanted to give people a chance to hear it where it could be right.
You know, it's interesting in this whole conversation, nobody has used yet the word risk. And Robert Shaw took risks that nobody in their right mind would think about. And so much of that had to do with talent, and so much of that had to do with, you know, it's like taking the B minor mass to the Soviet Union. Nobody's going to tell him no. And you know, to both your points, you don't want me to come? Fine, I don't have to come.
That's
But
right.
there was always that, of course we can do it. I think there's a story.
Against the norms, pushing against the givens.
Exactly.
Well, how about the Carnegie Hall performance of Mahler 8? Now, who in the world would imagine that before you die, you're going to do a Carnegie Hall performance of Mahler 8 with singers in the first tier? That room was full of singers. The orchestra was on the stage. It's a small stage. Chorus was on the stage, but the chorus was in that first tier. I mean, and Judith Aaron just soldiered on. She thought, this is great. I mean, and I think he had programs till this year, 2021. He had in mind what he would do with those concerts.
Yes.
So never, and the risk of commissioning the hymnomith. Goodness gracious!
When he was a baby at that point. He was so young.
That's right.
Yeah, he was just.
And
that
how
was before
he
I got to New York.
Yeah, how he even knew. And then there's that great story of the baritone, didn't quite have his part under control. So hymnomith tugs on Robert's leg when Robert's conducting and the baritone's singing. Robert, I think he called him Bob, but Robert, find out what notes that guy can sing. I can write them. I mean, imagine what they went through in the training. That's a hard piece. That's a hard piece today.
Oh, it's very solid. Yeah.
It's just fantastic. The chorales are, and of course the Whitman text, and Shaw could tell those stories about that Lincoln procession. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
We're standing right there, you know.
Alice,
right?
Can Alice talk about spirituals for a minute, given our time and place right now?
I would say so, yeah.
I would be delighted to, because he taught me how to do those too. I had one, my mother was from South Carolina and my husband was from Tennessee, so I considered myself 2/3 Southern. My father was from New England, so I had people on both sides of the Civil War in my background. But anyway, one of the first, in the first album we did, there was a spiritual. And I took in an arrangement and Bob said, this is, we can't use this. And he disappeared for an hour and came back with a piece of paper with just one little line on it of a counter melody towards what was there. And then that was the basis of the whole arrangement. I had been trying to harmonize it. This was the first one, and it was a melody that just went up and down way too fast. But I learned that you just simply had to sing the melody yourself in your own inadequate voice, but imagining that you were Black and in the fields, and feel the tempo that it would be at, feel what where the word stresses were, feel where you could take time, where you couldn't change it. And you worked totally, the whole arrangement grew out of that. And we didn't have any rules that we started from, but gradually I found that if I restricted myself to the notes that were in the melody, rather than just all the notes of the major scale, then I was going to have a much better,
that's important,
much better arrangement. So that it's as if you're working within a physical plant, and there are certain leaves and ways that things are going to grow within that plant. And if you stay within that plant, you get a result which is so tight. It's all within its own skin. And I just found that the combination of that and then learning from Shaw, part of what he did, I'm sure he knew instinctively, but also had learned from Waring, that jazzy kind of beat that is just absolutely irresistible. And the games that you can play with tossing words back and forth in rhythm, like call and response and things like that, but just all of those games. So that I learned how to do the up-tempo ones in that way. It's a game that you're playing where people are tossing words back and forth. And then with the melodic ones, to just let those melodies soar and stay out of the way. And I remember, you mentioned Wendell Whalum, and I remember a conversation with them for one of the times that I was in Atlanta, and we were talking, and I remember Wendell Whalum saying to Bob and to me, "Did you take our music seriously?" And that was so meaningful to me, and I'm sure it was to Bob too, because it's gorgeous. The other thing I learned from that about spirituals was that if you were doing something like a Vittoria motet or a Bach chorale or a piece of serious music on one of our arrangement albums, trying to find a place, trying to fit it in the album was terribly hard. And the only thing that would hold its own after one of those pieces was a spiritual, which made me think there's the weight, the historical weight of the O Vos Omnes is exactly the same as the historical weight of Were You There?
Oh, interesting.
You know, the possibility is there.
Yeah.
They're coming from the same place.
Just quick. Well, this is going to turn the conversation a little bit, but I want to be sure before we close up here that the other important thing, besides RCA Victor in the early days, and probably Walter Gould with Lawson Gould, those were important people in getting the music out there. We mustn't forget about Robert Woods and Telarc, because I think Telarc was the first company that said, we got to get this guy on recorded music. And I mean, I think they did every single one of his concerts long into his Atlanta years. Here they would come, Robert Renner and Jack Renner and Robert Woods, to make that inestimable sound. And they deserve a great deal of credit also.
3 months before Shaw died, we did the Dvorak Stabat Mater in November, and he died in January. And that was a piece he'd never done. I mean, you talk about all these things are just You know,
Oh, Philip
yeah.
Glass. Remember him trying to do Philip Glass in the concertmaster of the orchestra, Cecilia, and she'd just look at the orchestra and shake her head. And of course, it's 950 measures of the same thing over and over again. He'd say, just point when the next measure comes. So she'd just always off. I said, why doesn't he just do the music he knows? No, not going to just do the music he knows. Gotta. And Charles Ives, we had Charles Ives every other month there for a while. Resulted in his first firing, right, Kiki?
Right, exactly. That and a few other things. Yeah.
So one of the people
There we
that
go.
is listening in and commenting, asking questions, expressed the wish that this could go on all night. I learned from Ann Howard Jones to be very respectful of people's time. So in order to get for a few of these questions, can I ask for at least another 15 minutes from our panelists? Is that all good?
Oh, sure.
Oh, heavens, yes.
Okay. All right. So we have a couple of interesting questions, and one had to do that I don't think has been addressed was a question about Shaw's facility for language. Somebody remarked that when I introduced Kiki, one of the things I said was that Kiki was a German coach for Shaw. What were his language abilities, and how did that present itself in rehearsing, you know, the great choral music in a variety of languages?
You mean besides swearing?
I assume that means besides swearing.
I think he was at somebody else's beck and call. Florence Copleth did a tremendous amount of coaching, and I think the early Brahms Requiem recording is her coaching. I don't think he could. I don't think he would trust himself to do it. But what Alice's point is also the correct one. He searched, when he's doing a translation, he searched for the exact sound of the German word in the English word that was its translation. And his English translations of the St. Matthew, the St. John, the Brahms, and on, you just can hardly beat them for their accuracy with the sense.
You had to use the same vowels, and it was
right.
His ear for language, his ear for music, included an ear for language, so that he would learn these texts with great laboriousness to speak them the right way, so that he could project the right thing when he was conducting, and he would really try to wrap his mouth around those Czech unpronounceable syllables and things like that. He took it very seriously, but it was part of the musician's ear to be able to listen for those tiny degrees of change, but also just study.
One other little thing, it became so clear that we couldn't be as efficient in rehearsal as he wanted if we had a native speaker show up to try to teach the whole chorus the diction. So I was dispatched to meet with the native speaker and try and put the sounds in IPA, International Phonetic Alphabet, so that we could then give them to the chorus. Well, thank you very much. I think I'd say to somebody for the Janacek, particularly glagolitic mass in that difficult pronunciation, say, well, now how sustain that vowel so I can figure out what that vowel is. Couldn't. No one couldn't. Well, it's, you know, same in French. Very difficult to sustain those vowels for a native speaker. So this was always a challenge, but we did it.
Someone is asking, I'm sorry, Kiki.
No, go ahead. I'll tell. It's not necessary.
Someone is asking, and I guess this is conjecture from all of you, although I'm sure he may have talked about it. What do you think Waring saw in him that early on that caused him to kind of become a patron of his?
Alice?
No, I can answer that. I think Waring came to Pomona while Bob was a junior, studying theology, and Bob had taken over the Glee Club while the director was on a leave of absence. He'd been asked to do so, and his Glee Club sang for Waring, and Waring could not possibly have missed, first of all, the vitality, just huge life force in this guy, the rhythm, the immediate contact both with the singers and with the audience. He was just a bridge between the singers and the audience. He was a born performer. And so I'm sure that Waring did not see him as a potential orchestral conductor. Waring saw somebody who could step right into his group and build his glee club and take over some of his own responsibilities. So I think it was perfectly clear that that was what was there. Yeah.
Offered him a plane ticket to come to New York, and Shaw said, well, I'll take a bus. I'll take the bus. So he sent him the money for the bus, or sent him a plane ticket, and Shaw took the bus and gave Waring the remaining money.
The change, yes.
Yeah, change. Yeah, he was
a freighter from New Orleans to New York. A freighter.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he just
39.
I don't think Mrs. Shaw would ever have scrubbed a floor, but Robert certainly had, and knew about knew about that kind of life in a home. Oh my!
Right.
And he decried the tone syllable bit, the Waring tone syllable bit, after a long time. But in the beginning, he was a prototypical exponent of that. He loved the idea of connecting words by consonant and by sustained consonants. He loved that idea, and it was hard for him to relax from that. But he
Someone
did.
remarks
But if you look
that,
at his,
go ahead, Alice.
if you look at his scores, where he has a final syllable or the final T of a word that you've sung on the preceding page, and you're doing all this stuff considering it, and he puts it there, but he always he precedes that T that he's copying again with the vowel that you're on. It comes right before it. So he doesn't copy just that. And it puts it, and it would be a great help if all of our choral scores did that. If they put the T under the final note, and you can have it at the end of the word, but you also put it under the final note, just to help it. In a way, I was thinking that he did that crazy stuff from Waring. The first concert I sang with him was a Christmas concert at Carnegie Hall when I was first year at Juilliard, and we did a whole lot of the Waring Christmas carols, and I never hated Christmas carols so much as that. We were absolutely on edge. He wouldn't let us sing 2 words in a row because we weren't doing it right. And so we just stop. And even in the concert, it was that way. It was not just sitting back and letting the Christian love flow through you and all of your memories of Christmas. It was just like being on an examination chair with devils poking you with pitchforks. Yes, that was what it was like.
Remember all those fantastic Christmas festivals that we sang in Atlanta, Kiki, and he would not allow the audience to applaud. I mean, this is the showbiz in him. Building up the tension until at the end the audience could do nothing but just roar.
And we finished every one of those concerts with is Alice's "Oh Come All Ye Faithful."
Yeah.
The most fabulous arrangement of that. Every year, it's the last thing we sing. And Emmanuel the First. You know,
wheeling around in the middle of that. My soul doth magnify the Lord. I mean, ever the preacher.
Yep.
Yes.
Someone
Absolutely.
remarks on the early portion of the film talking about Shaw's family of origin and his parents, his father, the preacher, his brother who became a preacher and then was killed in the war. And someone is curious about what became of his relationship with his parents and siblings.
Go ahead, Alice.
His 2 sisters were both professional singers.
Right.
And one sister was in New York, had come ahead of him, and was a very, very well-known singer in New York and earning a very good living. And so it wasn't as if he was the only one in his family that was going out to do interesting things. It's a very interesting family, I must say. But I don't know much about his relationship with the parents, except that I met his mother. His father had died, I think, before I knew him. But I met his mother at one point, and I met Anne, and then his youngest brother.
And
not an easy family.
Oh, excuse me. Let me just say one quick. There's a very funny picture of the Shaw family all lined up perfect, all spit polished hair comb, and Shaw off on the right side, the youngest, making faces and doing all the crazy stuff in the picture.
Yes, right.
I think typifies his attitude.
Yes.
For people to know, his older sister Holly, who was the New York sort of a starlet singer,
Yes.
a lot of Broadway work, and I think Toscanini said of her show it was his favorite show. But All the Things You Are ostensibly was written for Holly, at least for her.
Oh my goodness.
So
I have it right.
yeah.
I always wish you'd arranged that, Alice, because I think that would suit your style.
Oh, that's a gorgeous song. I'd be happy to do that.
It's a great song.
I always steered away from any copyrighted songs. I didn't want to get into that.
One of the things that I appreciate about the film is that it's so honest about his struggles, his workaholism, his alcoholism, the failure of his first marriage. One thing that struck me in rewatching the film, and I think it's Alice who talks about this, the fact that he was in an unhappy marriage and the Shaw Chorale was touring, and he had a number of liaisons with singers in the chorus. And I think, Alice, you talk about how he a new attractive female singer would come into the choir and you'd say, oh boy, you can see what's coming. These days, that falls on our ears maybe a little bit differently than it would back then.
Even then it was
very, yeah.
Nobody's saying anything.
No one wants to talk about that.
No.
Well, you can't say anything because you might get in trouble.
Yeah.
We did, in terms of making the film, we did have to think about that. And we chose to deal with it, but not concentrate on it.
Sure, of course.
Yes.
Alice could speak differently to this maybe, but it seemed like most of those relationships were consensual. Yeah. And we did poke around pretty significantly because we didn't want to get in any, we certainly didn't want somebody coming forward and saying, wait, So I think, I hope we dealt with it, not overly delicately or, too politically correct, but with sensitivity to the subject.
Absolutely. Anne touched on his score study, and I have from my days in singing at BU several Shaw edited scores of masterworks, which are things of beauty. Someone asked an interesting question. Do any of the panelists have concern that many younger musicians are learning from listening to recordings instead of reading and interpreting the score?
Oh, absolutely. And they're learning from computers. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if anything's on YouTube, then I can copy it, and I don't have to depend on my own instincts or my own. No, it's the worst possible thing that could be happening. I think when I was preparing for Mr. Shaw, I listened to a lot of performances, not all of his. I tried to see what was out there. What's the tempo that is the conventional tempo for this movement? How far away from the conventional is Mr. Shaw suggesting? And people were trying to copy him. So it was interesting to see how that was reflecting. But I always have James Levine and the Schulte and all the New York guys. I have all those tempo markings for every movement that I was preparing for Shaw written on the top of the score. And then it was curious because in some instances, Mr. Shaw was clearly listening to a take of something that he was recording, and he would write in the score, quarter note equals 72, parentheses, too fast, of himself. And then he'd go back and maybe the performance would be 68. I mean, the guy was a walking metronome. And I lay that to the early days in live radio, where he developed such a sensitivity to passing time that he got a very keen sense of how long a second really was. But anyway, yes, as my concern is what you say. Score study is the most important thing we do besides rehearse and perform, I think.
Well, score study was what he learned from Julius Herford.
Yeah.
And with Julius, who was whatever generation descendant of Mendelssohn. As his teacher studied with somebody who had studied with Mendelssohn. So we went right back to the great tradition. And it's what did the composer hear when he put these markings down on the page? That's what you're looking for. And that's exactly what score study is all about.
And
of course, we can't answer.
Right. He would say, for instance, that it is the composer. He would be talking particularly about Beethoven, for example. And in the massing C, the last page is every single marking dynamically is all fortissimo. And he said, now it's up to the conductor to understand that every member of the orchestra cannot play fortissimo, or the only thing you're going to hear is the tuba, the piccolo, and all the trumpets and trombones. So the conductor has to have his or her ear tuned to adjust that. But he said most people don't even realize that that dynamic is that way until, because they haven't looked at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was paralyzing to me. He was to have conducted a Mozart Requiem at BU one spring when I think it was actually Caroline that was very ill and he couldn't come. So he sent his marked score to me to conduct the Mozart, and he used green pencil, as you remember so well. And I'll tell you, there wasn't a note that was unmarked. Something about every single note mattered to him. And I found it very difficult to look at that while conducting because it just made me think about tears. But,
Yes.
meticulous.
And
Well,
those orchestral librarians got extra Christmas gifts every year, right?
They were
All
so
the
glad
parts had to be marked.
when he retired. They were so glad because finally somebody like Jonathan DeLuey, the principal oboist, say, "What's the matter with that guy? Doesn't he think we know how to play in the style?" Somehow it never occurred to me to just read it to him. He had to perfect it somehow.
Well,
It's the way he learned the parts.
I suspect we could certainly you three could sit around and talk and share stories all night. By way of wrapping up, I just want to say, the reason that we're doing this way this year is because of circumstances in the world, but generally this festival is about people being together for a week in a room trying to create something beautiful, as I've heard in Ann Jones's words before. And we are all, as choral musicians, it's so hard right now. It's so hard to be deprived of that. So I would be curious to know what's been a silver lining for you in this situation, or what have you learned? What are you hopeful about as far as a return to singing for all of us?
So I'll jump in first because I want to start with something I'm sorry to say is negative. I never ever thought in my entire life that singing in groups in a room would be deemed dangerous. And that breaks my heart. And I don't know if we're going to come back all the way from it. It's going to take a good deal of re-engineering of ventilating systems in rooms. We might even, what do you know, have rooms where windows open. Instead of containing everything and then just recirculate it. We can't do that with a virus like this. And I think, I don't know. I mean, there are very few rooms big enough, and then you have to vacate them after 20 minutes and let them sit while the air gets blown back out and new air blown back in. I mean, this is really difficult. So I don't have, there's a terrible, painful article in the Boston Globe about all the gig musicians. I mean, I'm talking about Metropolitan Opera stars who are locked out of Europe because they can't enter the European Union. Thank you, Mr. Trump. Pardon me for all you Texans, or New Mexicans. But it's, I think that some of what's being visited on us as artists is just terrible.
This year was the 50th anniversary of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra Chorus.
Can you believe it?
And it also is the last year of our 20-year wonderful. We've had incredible longevity with this orchestra and chorus, fantastic orchestra that has come from Robert Shaw's investment in the orchestra that he made year after year after year, just fighting the board tooth and nail to put really high quality musicians in this orchestra, and that tradition has moved forward. And this is the last year of Robert Spana, who's been here 20 years. So his last year, our 50th year, we look at this incredible season that was planned, and it's like that for everybody. I'm not saying that we're special, but it is, I think, especially painful for us in Atlanta, given Shaw's incredible investment into the world of American classical music and its vibrance I mean, look at the playing field for the last 30 or 40 years. I mean, it's tremendous what some of these performing arts folks are doing.
But look ahead and look back. We can still sing.
Yes, we
And
can.
it is a time for us to rethink all of our things that we've taken for granted. And it's a time to think in terms of the individual singer, the family singer, the small chamber music groups, instead of all the big, and that music is much bigger than we are. There's no way we can snuff it out. And it's going to be there. It's going to be different, but song is there. And the chance to make music is always there, just like the birds, so that we can make it, we can come through it. We can do it. It won't be the same afterwards, but it may be absolutely wonderful things opening up. I'm very hopeful.
Lots of
That
people
is-
are trying small, like groups of 4 and 5 and 6 at a time in rehearsal. And I think that's, for many, that's more productive, more like what we want to be doing than virtual rehearsing.
Yes, I totally agree. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Alice, those are wonderful thoughts to
Yeah.
end on. And I'm so grateful to have had this time with the three of you, and so grateful that this situation that we're in, for as difficult as it is, kind of made this possible. So I'm very grateful for that. Before we close, I just want to say to the people that are watching who are registered for this festival, that the next thing that is going on tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, when Kira Harrison will be leading the first of 2 sessions of yoga for singers, and that's wonderful. We hope you'll be up for that. And then at 9 o'clock tomorrow, I'll be on with Mornings with Matt, talking about the schedule for tomorrow, which is the rest of the week is just going to be fantastic. But what a wonderful day it's been. And Alice, Kiki, and I'm so grateful to you for being in on this. And again, Kiki, such gratitude for allowing that wonderful film to be shared with all of us. Thank you all. Be well, sleep well, and we'll see you again.
Thanks to everyone.
Keep singing.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful to see you all. Be healthy, be happy. Bye.
Keep singing.
Keep singing, right?
Keep singing.